Are you ready now?
Oh, yes, go for it.
Good afternoon. Please silence all electronic devices. Our meeting will be live in 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Louis Vieira, Chair of the HART Board of Directors. Please, if you don't mind, silence all electronic devices for the duration of this meeting. Welcome to the May 2nd, 2023 HART Special Board of Directors meeting, which is now called to order. The meeting format is hybrid with board members physically present at the HART Administrative Office here at 1201 East 7th Avenue, Florida Conference Room, and participating via communication media technology. Please stand if you're able to do so and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Staff, please take attendance.
Chair Vieira,
Here.
Director Owen,
Here.
Director Williams,
Here.
Director Castor,
Here.
Director Frazier,
Here.
Director Hudson,
Here.
Director Johnson,
Here.
Director Kemp,
Here.
Director Knight, Director Myers,
Here.
Director Wolstall.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next is public comment. Staff, please proceed in facilitating public comment.
Thank you, Chair. We have Mr. Finn Donegan in the audience to speak physically.
Hello, my name is Finn Donegan. I'm a local 7th grader at Coleman Middle School, and I'm doing this for a civics project actually, and I'm here to present some suggestions for HART and what could be done in the future. So, first of all, I'd like to recommend increased service. Like, I don't know if it is just me, but I think there should be increased service because I know local service here runs every hour, and yet in the future, and Greyhound runs like also every hour, so those are the national buses. So maybe, my suggestion is in the future, maybe increase service to at least every 30 minutes because the streetcar goes every 15 minutes and every 12 minutes during the day. And also, bus rapid transit in the future. I know you guys have the Metro Rapid, and the Metro Rapid system has a decrease of 15% in travel time because of longer green lights and fewer stops. Maybe, and I'm just going to compare HART to, Miami has a BRT system that's like fully like own roads and everything like that. So maybe own roads in the future, or at least its own lanes that regular vehicles aren't allowed in. And maybe a light rail system or even a metro in the future to accommodate our growing population. The county's population is supposed to increase by 29% from now till 2040, which is a lot. What are we going to do with all those new residents? A lot of people need to use public transit because they can't afford cars, and unfortunately here, it's really inadequate to not have a car because of public transit. I actually suggest maybe in the future 0.5% sales tax increase on public transit to help expand these, and so that's just what I think. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Let's give him a round. You did a great job, and that takes a lot of heart to get up here and speak like that. And so you're in the 7th grade. Did I hear that right?
Oh, yes, I am.
So you'll be going into 8th grade next year.
Yes.
That's awesome. What do you want to do when you get out of school? Do you know yet?
Yeah, I want to go into and maybe a career in aviation or even maybe helping with public transit. But I do really think public transit is underutilized here, and it should be increased in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any board members want to salute Mr. Donovan by any words? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I just want to see if we have some consulting contracts that we might consider.
Yeah. You did a great job, buddy.
Thank
Great
you.
job. Thank you, buddy. Any other public comment?
That was all that I had
Okay.
registered.
Great. Okay. Seeing no further comments, we will move to the General Counsel's report. Mr. David Smith, our General Counsel, is here to give a brief overview of the meeting flow. Mr. Smith, if you don't mind, sir, or Ms. Mandel. Well, I can wax on further on how well Mr. Donovan did. So, and is that your mother there, or?
Yes, she's
That's cool. You have to be very proud. I am. Good for you. That takes a lot of guts and a lot of chutzpah. Pun intended. Look at this guy. He's out of control. Good job, buddy. Good job. Mr. Smith.
Yes, good afternoon, David Smith, General Counsel. I've been having some conversations with Mr. Wenzel, who is the attorney, as you know, for Ms. LeGrand. And it's my understanding that he misunderstood the settlement offer that I circulated to you, I don't know if it was last night or early this morning. So he's looking at that and talking to his client, because we were talking about, is there some other middle ground that would make sense that might be acceptable to this board? So right now, I'm not entirely sure what his offer is. So I can't, I'd be unable to present you a settlement offer until he settles on that, and then we present it to you. But let me tell you how the process would work. The idea would be to discuss settlement. If there's a possibility of reaching a settlement, it vitiates the need to go through with the balance of the hearing. And essentially what he had indicated was he would like to put a letter in the record in his client's personnel file, sort of like a clear the name hearing before the clear the name hearing, and would agree to settle. The settlement offer, as I understood it, was he'd provide the 2 months notice under the employment agreement, and that would entitle her to payment through the next 2 months. A consequence of those 2 months would also be you get the 401A proration. Now, the 401A proration is an entitlement, not the additional 2 months. But whatever is accrued to date is an entitlement. We can't take that away. Also, there was some accrued, I don't know, it was vacation pay. Had to be vacation pay because she's not entitled to sick pay unless she's been here for 10 years, which she is not. So there would be an increment of vacation pay that would also be accumulated by virtue of extending that period to June 30, as opposed to leaving immediately. But the resignation under the employment agreement, if you remember it, and I know I sent this to you, but you got a lot of documents. Under the employment agreement, there's a requirement to provide 60 days notice. So there's an argument that could be made by the employee that they're therefore entitled to 60 days. And that's what I understood the gravamen of the offer to be. When I just recently spoke with Mr. Wenzel, he thought somehow he had included severance in there, which there is no entitlement to severance if you resign. So I don't understand where the confusion came from. But he's in the process of speaking with his client, because I think he spoke with her, to her, with numbers that were not even on the table as I presented them to this board. So if we can get that clarified. So we were proposing that if we could get a settlement, if this board were inclined to accept a settlement, that would end the process. If this board is not inclined to accept a settlement or is not obligated to accept a settlement under the employment agreement, we would proceed with the hearing. The process in the hearing would be that Mr. Adams would present his update and a summary of exactly what his findings were, provide you additional information in that regard. There's some effort to tie it into the policies and other matters that could possibly rise to the level of termination for cause. Then there would be a rebuttal by Mr. Wenzel. And he would explain why he believes, I guess, that is not the appropriate conclusion to arrive at. And then finally, there would be a reply by Mr. Adams. And Ms. Cindy Townsend is here as your outside labor and employment litigation counsel to answer any questions regarding the risks attendant to that litigation. So it seemed to us just before the most recent snafu that we may have the makings of a proposal that would make sense to this board, because it would get you out of the entire process. You would have a terminated or an employee who's leaving, and you would also have the opportunity to go on to your next task, which is obviously addressing the issues the legislature is going to raise, because it's essential to what HART does and whether it survives to be able to address those issues. And if HART can't get its, quote, act together as perceived by the legislature or the governor, we won't exist. But I'm taking a little bit more time because he needs a little more time. But that was the concept. We were very close to a proposal that we could at least in good faith recommend for this board for consideration. It's not our decision, it's yours. But now I'm not certain as to what that proposal is. So I can only ask you to give us another 5 or 10 minutes. Let me go visit with opposing counsel and see where we're at. Yes, sir.
And yes, sir. So do you need to speak to Mr. Wenzel during this time, I assume, or?
I need to find out whether he's gotten things squared away with his client.
Okay.
Because-
And I see the hands raised of Board Member Hudson and Board Member Wassel. Do you all want to wait until after or right now?
I mean, I think we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, this hearing, this date was, I think, decided upon out of deference to her counsel. So I'd say let's get going with item 3A. And at the same time, I think he can confer with his client. But we've all got places to be, so let's be on the calendar for a while. So let's go. That's my view.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
He stole his thought.
Yes.
In that regard, I would also, the reason why I bifurcated the process this way is because part of the offer was predicated upon the fact that we would not go through this process, that they would step away, minimize the damage, and move on to what they're moving on to. So I would ask, just if you give me 5 minutes, and I'll be back one way or another, and we'll proceed, if you could grant me that.
Okay. So how about this? In deference to people's times, it's 1:13. We will begin promptly at 1:18.
Okay, thank you.
Recess for 5 minutes.
Director Myers?
Here.
Director Rolstel?
Here.
You still have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, go ahead, sir.
Yes, again, David Smith, General Counsel for the record. I conferred with Mr. Wenzel, and I have the following offer that he is presenting to the board in order to settle the matter and avoid the necessity of additional hearings and disputation. First of all, she would seek to resign with 2 months' notice as she believes she's entitled to under her employment agreement. That would be June 30, 2023. The record information I sent you last night shows that constitutes $48,653.44 payment through June 30. The 401A payment would also be through June 30. That would be an additional payment of $7,555.96. If you wanted to figure out what 31st would be of May, it'd be half that. The accrued annual leave with the additional 2 months is a total of $54,458.68. It comes to a total of $110,668.08. No attorney's fees. They will waive any effort to seek attorney's fees. So that's the offer that he has been authorized by his client for me to provide this board to consider as an effort to resolve this issue short of continuing with the hearing. You know that does one also put a letter in a personnel file, not present it to the board, not expect it to necessarily accept it, believe it, or otherwise, but just to be in the file so that when people seek the file, they can obtain that. I believe that is it. Oh, the other issue is to be treated as all other CEOs are treated under the 401A. And some of you may not have been on this board long enough to know. There was a 401A established for the highly compensated people. Essentially, that was a CEO here. The person who was the trust administrator for the plan, and I'll put this politely, I did not make all the filings required by the IRS. So there's an issue about the tax exempt status of the 401A. And what Hart has done, I don't know exactly all that Hart's done because that wasn't anything I was involved in, but I do understand they intend to treat CEOs who have a tax liability because the plan was not properly handled in a certain manner. Whether that's to pay the tax penalty or not, I do not know. But what she's requesting is be treated as all CEOs for the same 401A that she's a participant in. I find that to be probably something you would be required to do anyway, because the 401A is an accrual that is hers as a matter of right. So, and if there was a problem with the 401A, it was because of the way it was managed by persons that Hart hired. So those are not the big issues. The big issue is the fundamentals I just described to you, employment through June 30 and all the accruals that are attendant to that. Any questions?
And thank you, and let the record reflect that Board Member Knight has joined us. Thank you, sir. One question before I take other questions. These items in this proposal, number one, this will include mutual releases, and number two, are these items that she would arguably be contractually entitled to?
I noticed that Mr. Wenzel's not in this room, so that's an easier question to answer. In meeting with Labor and Employment Council beforehand, we were advised it looks like these are a matter of entitlement under the employment agreement.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the information at hand on how much we've spent so far on this investigation with legal fees and investigators?
I do not have that. I don't know whether Mr. Adams has even tendered a final bill.
Okay.
And, of course, the question would be the constituent elements of that. You could also include payment that she received while suspended, which, just for record, was shorter than Ben Lever. But that's just information.
Thank you.
Questions, thoughts from board members? So, Mr. Smith, I'm sorry. So is it up to us now to address this offer or choose to reject it and go forward with Mr. Adams' presentation? Or
It is up to this board to decide whether it wants to settle, and if it does, to settle the case, and if it does not, to proceed with your investigation summary.
Okay. Any thoughts from board members on this prospective determination? I'll give my thoughts, right? I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I believe at this time that in line with HART's board policies that directly names every single member of this board as a fiduciary to the organization, that unless there is some type of significant evidence that has been presented, which there hasn't been because it's trying to be circumvented, there seems to be a clear violation of Florida Statute 215. And that right there would be a violation of our legal priorities to the organization, much less the other litany of questions of all of the gaping holes in the stories that are evident. So if the only settlement offer is that we must not be able to hear the continued facts and ask questions to fill these holes, then I don't see a way that we could reasonably accept this offer.
Thank you, sir. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
What's statute 215?
Is,
It's the statute that was pointed out by Attorney Adams' investigation. It's in our binder handouts.
if you want additional information on that, Mayor, you should probably hear from our litigation counsel in that regard, so you know what the risk is attendant to that.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. First, I know that this has been presented as a settlement offer demand from Ms. LeGrand, but I also want you to take into account that it is, as a matter of right, there's actually nothing preventing her from right now tendering her resignation, giving the 60-day notice, which would put it to the period that she's requesting, June 30th. And if she were to do that, that would not require any approval by this board, because the contract does not contemplate that the board can agree or not agree to accept her resignation. So alternatively, one other way to view this is if she tenders her resignation, giving 60 days notice, the only question, in my opinion, that this board will have to consider is whether or not it wants to bring her back to work out her 60 days notice, or whether it wants to keep her on administrative leave until that notice is exhausted. So I also wanted to point that out, that that is also something that needs to be considered today. The protection that we get from it being framed as a settlement offer is that we get a mutual release from her where we can protect ourselves from future litigation, from any potential claims that she can bring against this board as a result of her employment with HART. And as your labor counsel, that would be the recommendation that I would make to you, because obviously there are so many factors that would be involved if this case were to go into litigation, not just the potential cost on the organization, but the time and the resources that will be expended in defending it. Whether it's a legitimate claim or not, once she files that lawsuit, that triggers the duty and to defend, and the attorney's fees starts to tick at that point in time. So there are also additional financial considerations that you need to take into account in making that decision today. So if there are any questions about that, I'm also happy to answer.
Board Member Kemp, then Board Member Upshaw-Frazier. Go ahead.
Well, that's new information to me, and I would put that on the list of things that we, as a board, must handle for the future. And I find it disturbing that we didn't have that information before this moment. But understanding that information at this moment, this is, not what I felt comfortable with walking in the room. But hearing that, I will make a motion then to move forward with that.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
Are you Ms. Townsend?
I am.
Hi, thank you. So I just make sure I want to understand. So if Ms. LeGrand were to right now walk in and give a resignation, she would be entitled to 60 days salary under the contract. She would be entitled to her accrued annual leave for that full 60, well, for whatever she's accrued.
Well, we have to look at the HART policy on, since she's under investigation, whether or not she would be entitled to the accrued leave if she resigns in good standing or not in good standing. So that is a factor. However, and I think that's part of the benefit of it being framed also as a settlement agreement, because that is something that the board can agree as part of the settlement to give to her.
Okay, so that part's negotiable, being,
Yes, because it's my understanding that because she's under investigation, if she were to resign, she would not be resigned in good standing.
okay. And what's the total amount? Like, I got the piecemeal, which is different than the email we got earlier. Could you give us the total amount that they're requesting?
Yes. Let's see if I have I think I have that in another binder. Do you have it handy?
This is actually your summary.
Yes, it is. So the total amount that's on the table as of right now, it's $110,668.08.
The accrual is 54.
Yes, her accrued annual leave, it's 394 hours through June 30th, and that is valued at $54,458.68.
And if this were to go to litigation, is there an obligation for the prevailing party to recoup their attorney's fees?
Absolutely, and that is also one of the biggest risks, because not only will you be paying me to defend you, if, for example, we took this all the way to trial, and even if a jury said, we believe that you had some good reasons for making the decisions that you did, but we don't agree with all of those reasons, and they were to award her one single dollar, that triggers her entitlement to the entire amount of her reasonable attorney's fees. And I can tell you with these types of cases, by the time we get to a trial, you could be looking at attorney's fees from her side as well as defense costs in excess of $500,000. So that is also a big risk that this board could potentially be facing if we did end up in litigation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Wassel. Go ahead, and then Board Member Hudson.
My undergrad was actually in HR, and I spent a better half of my career fighting complaints and attempts like this, EEOC complaints. I never gave an inch, no matter what attorney said, because I always knew that I could and did win, and ended up paying the attorney far less than what would have ultimately been paid out. No matter what was suggested to me. I'm extremely concerned that we're receiving this counsel and advice when there's so much information out there that's been reported that would clearly demonstrate a complete lack of a case by Ms. LeGrand. Simple things like she, and I'll go ahead and I guess now, since it sounds like we're pre-doing this, things like she admitted in writing that she knew Miss Wright was working in New Orleans since May, but she continued to do things like pay her hurricane evacuation leave in September, which just clearly demonstrates her complete lack of ability to adhere to her own policy in Chapter 140.02 of HART's plan, which puts her in charge of exactly every single one of these items that have gone on. Her direct violation of paying more than 6 weeks of severance pay, of violating state statute, etc. I just absolutely can't get on board with accepting some type of severance without hearing the alleged exculpatory evidence that was suggested during the meeting 5 weeks ago when delay tactics put us here today.
Thank you, sir. Board Member Hudson, then Board Member Olin.
So trying to separate.
And if I may, just before anyone else who has their hands raised, because I see a couple, just for clarity's sake, put them down if you don't wish to be recognized again, please. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks. So trying to separate this into what we know and what we don't know. We are certain that if she were to resign, she would not be entitled to the accrued annual leave. Is that right? Because she's not in good standing?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so she wouldn't be entitled to that, but that's part of the settlement she's proposing? That
It is.
So, okay. Okay, thanks. That's
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm curious today on the procedure today. So we would probably take a vote whether or not I know a motion was made to accept these terms, which is really an odd way to do this because we're accepting kind of a first offer of well, maybe there are other offers, but in contemplation of litigation, a first offer, which we as a board should collectively have the right to counteroffer or So I guess, I feel like we're getting a little bit bullied here today. And I guess I'd like to ask, as far as procedure goes, I mean, if we were to move to terminate her for cause right now with what the information that we have, knowing that she's in violation of Florida statute, which I have gotten that information, would we be within our rights to do that now?
I would suggest, as Mr. Wastel said, that you hear the rebuttal information before you make that determination. But once you have all the facts before you and she's been accorded due process, it could be a defensible decision to terminate for cause.
Well, I guess, and that's my big question, the due process that she has a right to, I guess is how we're, I feel like we've been here a while. I feel like this has been going on a long time. I feel like we've heard, in my mind, I've heard enough. I don't want to make up my mind for other board members, but a clear violation of Florida statute, which that's the information that I got. I've reviewed it. I've looked at it. I guess my question is there any type of due process violation if someone were to file a substitute, or someone were to raise a substitute motion to terminate for cause based on violation of Florida statute?
I would caution you to have your hearing before you do that if you're disinclined to accept a settlement because you believe you've not heard all of the information yet and you want to have an opportunity to hear all that information and determine whether there is a basis for termination for cause, I'd recommend you use that process.
And I hear you, and I'd like to do that. The problem is the information that I'm getting now that maybe shame on me for not noticing, but the information that we're getting now could say that she could walk in and give a resignation letter, and then our due process is gone. That's how I look at it. Am I seeing that wrong?
Well, we're not exactly have an entitlement like she does.
Right.
So it's not always a two-way street with due process, as you know. Mm-hmm. That is not what has happened, and what has happened is all of this came into fruition Friday evening, over the weekend, and last night. I don't know why there was such lack of focus on behalf of the person who is making this offer now. I don't mean to disparage anybody, but the proposals were not along the lines that would track nicely with the contract until now. But actually, when I asked if that was in fact what was being asserted, I was told it wasn't until they finally clarified it. So you got a situation with a settlement. If it's not the intent or the will of this board to accept a settlement or to make a counteroffer at this point, then there should be a motion to proceed with the hearing and to not accept settlement. Otherwise, you can make a counteroffer, as you correctly indicated.
Okay, and maybe I wasn't hearing you good. But if we reject the settlement and she comes in here and gives her resignation letter, then that would kickstart the contract where she would have those rights pursuant to the contract. That's what I thought I heard from previous counsel. Did I hear that right, or am I hearing that wrong?
No, you're correct.
Yeah, so I would expect that. I would expect that to happen.
We expected
I
it
don't
to
want to be
happen
stupid here.
We expected it to happen on Saturday. I have no idea why it didn't happen.
Okay, so do you see my point? What
I
I'm
do.
saying is, if we made a motion now to terminate for cause based on Florida statute, that
I think if you go forward with your proceeding and ultimately decide to terminate for cause before there's a tender of a resignation, she's no longer able to resign.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Myers, and then Kemp, I think you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is we go ahead and settle this based on cause. We all heard the investigation some weeks ago, and it was determined then that there were a lot of evidence based on cause that was presented before us. And so I can support paying administrative leave, the 401k, and the accrued leave, and we settle this today as of May 2nd and get this behind us. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Kemp, then Board Member Upshaw Frazier.
Thank you. And I thought I heard some more distinctions that I wasn't aware of before when Ms. Townsend spoke after I asked my other questions, which I'll withdraw my motion at this point because there hasn't been a second Ms. Townsend, did you say something like resigning in bad standing or not in good standing? You made a distinction about that.
Yes, because it's my understanding that there's a HART policy that talks about when an employee is under investigation and resigns while under investigation, that the person is not entitled to their accrued annual leave. Now, of course, this board has not made any findings as it pertains to that investigation. So arguably, if she were to tender her resignation prior to any finding being made, I think there is a good argument that, she may still be entitled to accrued leave. But I have been told that the policy will not allow her to get the accrued leave if she resigns under investigation, because that's considered to be not in good standing.
And she's not in good standing now.
Correct.
Okay, so we have the suggested $110,668 that includes accrued leave, a 401 payment, and administrative leave. And if we were to not have the accrued leave as part of that, it would reduce it to $56,209.40. And you say that there's not an entitlement to that at this time.
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. I wish we had all this information before the meeting. But I guess, again, I'll just make a motion, I'll try this, and just say to make a motion to accept resignation as of June 30th with all the other conditions, but for not including the accrued annual leave. And, reducing this to $56,209. I don't know if that brings us anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, ma'am. Board Member Upshaw Frazier, go ahead.
Thank you. One, I wanted to first say generally, I've litigated a lot of cases, and I can tell you that however strong you think your case is, there's always a risk with going to litigation. And then I say that especially when you haven't heard the other side's case. I know we have a memorandum from her counsel. That's very different from hearing what they're going to say in person. So I would be very uncomfortable as a board member moving to terminate for cause, having not heard the other side's case. In addition, even if we felt very strongly about there being cause for termination, there are other considerations. Our obligation is to HART as an organization. And so there is a cost-benefit analysis as to whether we want to terminate for cause for whatever reason, whether that's on principle, whether that's to punish somebody, for whatever reason that is, versus figuring out what is the best outcome that we can get so that we can move on, address some of the other threats that are to this organization, and put us in the best position to find a CEO moving forward that can lead this organization. So with that being said, I support Commissioner Kemp's motion. I second it.
Thank you. Any other comments either on the motion or the issues before us? Yes, sir.
I would say that even if we reduce the 110 down to the 50, but then we still extend her out 60 days with her rather high salary, she's almost back to the exact same amount.
Actually, I believe that amount includes the extension through June 30th.
So the 56,000 is all in.
Yes.
I would rather just then if that's the case, it's May the 2nd. If the total amount being offered to her is 56,000, I would rather we just offer her a lump sum payout today and in her employment effective immediately. So I would make that substitute motion.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a substitute motion, which my understanding of procedure means takes priority over the prior motion that was made. Correct me if I'm wrong, okay? By Commissioner Wassel with a second by Commissioner Owen, or by Board Member Owen. And any other comments on that, on the issues before? Yes, ma'am.
I would like to hear from our counsel what that would entail, what Director Wastel's motion would entail.
Well, I think you would have to tell us what that lump sum number is. That's the missing piece that
The
we
number.
need. Would it be that 15?
It's 56,209.40 cents. That's at least the math I got when I took away from 110,000 the accrued annual leave of $54,458.68. That was my number that I just came up with.
And yes, I think certainly that is something that the board can certainly offer and do that with a resignation effective today.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Mutual releases, each side responsible for their own attorney fees and costs.
Yes, and that's of course is assuming that she accepts this counteroffer from us.
Great. And so how about this? Before we do a vote to proceed and move forward with this, because you have to take it to Ms. LeGrand's attorney, Mr. Wenzel, any further comments? Okay. Roll call, please.
Chair Viera?
Yes.
Director Owen?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes.
Director Castor?
Yes.
Director Frazier?
Yes.
Director Hudson?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Yes.
Director Kemp?
Yes.
Director Knight?
Yes.
Director Myers?
Yes.
Director Wolstel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously, sir.
Thank you. And now to our council, and I'll give him a second here. No, that's fine. Now, do you take that to Mr. Wenzel and we await? And if I may, how long do you think you'll need? 5 minutes? So let's take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back. Thank you.
Resignation, just the 110, she's gone, everything is resolved, exchange, releases, et cetera. So the problem is the number. Now, here's the issue. In talking with Cindy Townsend, we want to confirm that the policy that was described to you as constituting not resigning in good standing, in fact, prevents her from receiving the accrued pay. It does prevent her from being considered having resigned in good standing, but I want to make sure it also has the additional consequence of not allowing her to receive her accrued vacation time. You get information that people give you, and sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it isn't. And of course, if you've ever seen her policy manual, no one knows every policy in that manual. But so if you want to proceed with your preliminary process, do so. We will research the issue on that policy. And if that policy does not vitiate the payment of the accrued leave, the number they're putting on the table is a number that resonates in an entitlement as opposed to a settlement offer. So we'd recommend you accept that, but right now we can't tell you that. So we're going to do our own research on that policy.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're going to do research on this issue while Mr. Adams speaks?
Yes.
Okay. Board members, any comments? Yes, sir.
And this is just something maybe Mr. Adams can clarify once he gets up here in his own report, which is the employee handbook, page 27, payout of annual leave, that dictates that employees will be eligible for a cash payout of all cumulative annual leave over 80 hours with the following guidelines. And that's that the employee must have used at least 80 hours of accumulated annual leave between October 1st and September 30th of that year. So that would be something that would be worth clarifying as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am. Go ahead. And then Board Member Myers.
So
Go ahead.
David, they're saying if it's not 110 110,000, it's nothing? Is that the response?
They're saying they'll accept 110,000. The deal would be done today if you would agree to pay them that.
But they're not open to any other amount?
It didn't appear to be open to any other amount.
Okay.
We certainly told them it would, that number less the 50,000, which was, I think, 56,000, but that didn't accept that. So we're basically about 54,000 apart at this point.
Okay. Well, I see a difference between not accepting
Yes.
110 versus, well, we're coming back at 110 because what's changed in the deal is it's a lump sum payment and not continued employment.
It is, that is exactly right. It was presented as though we're looking at the number. And I think that's what she's looking at. When you negotiate, as you well know, oftentimes lawyers will devolve to a discussion of numbers and dollars. That doesn't mean they're waiving any of their arguments if and when it comes time. But that number would get it settled in their opinion.
I'm trying to understand, are they not open to getting a counter offer if it's not 110, or are we just?
Did not seem to be open to a counteroffer. Yes, that's the way she read it as
Okay.
well.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Myers? Okay, Commissioner Knight, go ahead. Or Board Member Knight, go ahead, sir.
Along with Director Upshaw Frazier,
And then,
if they're not willing to look at another number, then where's the negotiation at?
I don't disagree. We don't want to bid against ourselves, and yeah. So go ahead, sir.
So procedurally now, we can get started, but there would be nothing to prevent a resignation letter, which would put us back in that the situation we were discussing earlier. Counsel, could you come up here and answer that? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yes, you are correct. There's nothing that would prevent her from tendering her resignation, which would then trigger the 56,000 and some dollars that was discussed earlier that she would be entitled to.
And if I may add, 56, and then you're going to research on the other funds,
Yes, on the accrued.
on entitlement, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's.
And I think I have an answer. I just need to discuss it with Mr. Smith.
And thank you for performing well under pressure. Thank you.
Also, real quick.
Oh, go ahead, sir, I'm sorry.
If we litigate these cases, just curious how HART does this. Is it outside counsel, or do we litigate it to a point with in-house counsel? How does that work?
Well, typically the litigation is assigned to outside counsel, so
Okay.
it would, in this case, it would most likely be myself,
Okay.
because Mr. Adams and I are the outside counsel, but he's now a witness in this matter,
Sure.
so it would most likely be my firm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions, anyone? Okay, so we will begin with Mr. Adams. And sir, while it's being prepared over there, about how much time do you think you'll need, roughly?
Roughly 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello, I'm back again. The first thing I was asked to do is to prepare a summary of the investigation findings, since it's been some time since we originally did that. And I came up with 5 things. Ms. LeGrand created an environment of fear and intimidation. Number 2, the CEO's behavior caused abnormal administrative turnover. Number 3, agency communication is terrible because people were afraid to speak up. 4, last-minute layoffs, quits, and severance packages violated HART policy and state law. And Ms. LeGrand knew or should have known about Terry Wright's dual employment as early as May 3rd, 2022. On April 25th, I believe the board's been provided with a copy of this letter, but Ms. LeGrand sent a 5-page letter rebutting some of the conclusions in the investigation. Number 1, HART turnover actually improved under CEO LeGrand's tenure. Number 2, layoffs were not last minute and complied with HART policy and state law. And number 3, Ms. LeGrand had no reason to believe that Terry Wright was dually employed. So the first thing I have to deal with is a preliminary matter. In the first paragraph of the letter, it states, as I've noted before, Mr. Adams expressed contempt that Ms. LeGrand did not extend his expiring contract, and it goes on further. I had nothing to do with that. If the board has questions about the terms and conditions of the legal contracts, your general counsel can deal with that, and he's the one, to my understanding, who extended the contracts due to the idea that they were going to restructure the general counsel function. So, but I can show you my contract, and as you can see, in the bottom right-hand corner, our contract was created on May 17, 2018. In all, it's basically a 5-year contract. It's a 3-year contract with 2 terms. And I had already received the 4th extension, so I didn't need to extend my contract in order to complete this investigation. So I don't really understand where that's coming from. And then secondly, you can see the contract isn't even administered by me. It's administered by Gwen Jacobs in my office. So let's get to the merits. Rebuttal point 1, which is that HART did not have abnormally high staff turnover under Ms. LeGrand. Up on the chart on the screen is a chart of the turnover presented by Ms. LeGrand in the rebuttal. As you can see, her predecessors had turnover over 2 years of approximately 37%. The bottom box is Ms. LeGrand, and you can see the turnover is approximately 31%. So the argument is that her turnover statistics were better than her predecessors. But the problem with this analysis is that Ms. LeGrand's turnover numbers are for all employees, not just the administrative employees. So if you just look at the administrative employees, the situation gets much more dire. You could see in the first fiscal year of Ms. LeGrand's tenure, turnover was 29.84%, roughly a third. In calendar year 2022, which is a little different than her statistics of fiscal year, I extended it to November because you'll recall in November there were layoffs and additional turnover. And in that case, for calendar year 2022, the turnover was 27.19%. So the turnover for the administrative employees was 57% over a 2-year period. You'll recall that I focused on the administrative employees because there was such a large disruption and a large turnover of the administrative staff, which created tremendous dysfunction within the organization. That's why I focused on the administrative employees as opposed to the collective bargaining employees. But you don't have to take my word for it. HART was audited pursuant to a performance audit report by CPA firm McConnell Jones, and you can see what they stated was HART maintains an organizational structure that has clearly defined units, minimizes overlapping functions, and has no excessive administrative layers. The current turnover rate for non-bargaining positions, open paren, non-union, close paren, is 28%, and the vacancy rate is 20%, which is high based on human resources best management practices. So when you compare the turnover statistics, CEO LeGrand's 10% versus the administrative employee of 27.19%, I believe the evidence supports the higher turnover rate. Point number 2, Ms. LeGrand did not engage in last-minute layoffs, which violated HART employment practices and state law. There's 5 tentacles to this one. The first is that the layoffs weren't at the last minute. Severance packages actually saved money. Severance packages didn't violate HART policy. Severance agreements were reviewed for consistency with state law, and Ms. LeGrand was not involved in the severance of Ms. Frenny. So let's take them one by one. The first idea is that the layoffs were not at the last minute. So you'll recall from my prior presentation, I asked HART IT to see if there were any documents or any records within the computer systems as to whether layoffs were discussed prior to November 9th, 2022 in the top half of this email message. The bottom is very clear. Mr. Adams, I've done an extensive search through email and all other local files, including executive, legal, HR staff, and local computers. In all cases, I was unable to find any documents that had any reference to the people listed below were ever selected for a layoff or any other documents prior to the layoffs that suggest there would be layoffs. I don't think there was any pre-planning, frankly, and I think they were done at the last minute on November 9th. Ms. LeGrand and herself actually has fingerprints on this. As you can see from this email, it's an email from Ms. LeGrand to agency counsel. And you look at the date and time, it's November 9th at 12:14 p.m. And approximately 2 or 3 hours before the layoffs were supposed to occur, she provided the severance agreement draft that she hoped that somebody would prepare for 6 different employees who were high-level employees, frankly. And so it just goes to show that nobody even thought about preparing the settlement agreements prior to 2 hours before the layoffs. Point number 2, severance was budgeted and basically saved money. A table was presented that showed that the 8 employees who were severed would have earned would have cost $1.2 million if not laid off. And so if you net out the $527,000, CEO LeGrand basically saved everyone $700,000. Again, you've seen this chart again. those functions that are in the red X's had to be reassigned to other people. So you either had to rehire people or you had to redistribute those functions to other people. So the argument that was a pure savings, I think, is dubious at best. Secondly, as you can see, 2 of the 8 people resigned. And if you look on the far right-hand side, approximately $76,000 was paid to the people who resigned. Well, all of you own businesses or run businesses, you don't pay people who resign severance. And so $76,000 shouldn't have been paid at all. So HART's response to fact number 2 is that the layoffs were at last minute and the reorganization was not shared in advance with any board committees, with the board chair, the committee chair, or anyone else. It's undisputed HART paid approximately $527,000 in severance payments to the laid off employees. And of that amount, about $76,000 was paid to people who resigned, which shouldn't have been paid at all. Fact 3, the severance packages didn't violate HART policy. There's, in the 2 inches of notebook that I presented to the board, there was 1 page that included a collective bargaining agreement. And the idea was that the laid off employees were non-bargaining employees, so the policies I claimed that were violated were irrelevant and misleading. If you go back to the email requesting the documentation of the previous layoffs, if you look at the bottom, it says the last layoffs documents was 3/2/2019 is attached, and you can see the attachment. The only reason the collective bargaining page was included in the packet was just to show this is a complete email, including the attachments, and I didn't rely on the collective bargaining agreements to analyze severance for non-collective bargaining agreements, or severance agreements. The policies, in fact, did violate HART policies. Ms. Frenny, as you know, was paid $33,921 in severance when she resigned. Ms. Frenny was also paid out at roughly $1,100 for sick time, which violated HART policy. Terry Wright was paid $23,000 of accrued vacation, which violated HART's policy, and severance paid to the other employees violated Florida Statute 215.425, which everyone knows now limits severance to 6 weeks. Fun fact, Florida Statute 215.425 is actually in Ms. LeGrand's contract because it limits the severance she can have to 20 weeks. So to say that that was not clear or not misunderstood strains reason. The next thing is point 4 is severance agreements were prepared by agency counsel and sent to outside employment counsel to ensure compliance with laws and policies. Again, I point back to the email that Ms. LeGrand actually sent at noon on November 9th to show that the severance agreement was prepared or forwarded by her, not anyone else. And then with respect to the severance agreements, they weren't sent to outside counsel. HART has 2 firms that provide outside employment counsel. One is my firm, Bennett, Jacobs, and Adams, and I'm here to tell you I did not review the severance agreements. The second is Ms. Townsend, who's been before you today, also has told me she did not review the completed settlement agreements. So in fact, the severance agreements were not sent to outside counsel and reviewed by outside counsel. Number 5, CEO LeGrand was not involved in the severance agreement with Ms. Frenzy. This is a technically true statement, but materially misleading. Let me tell you why. First of all, you remember the Franny resignation letter. It was addressed to Ms. LeGrand, and it starts off, it's often said that people quit bosses, not jobs. It goes on for another 4 or 5 days, basically lambasting CEO LeGrand with terrible employment behaviors, which you've already heard about today, or heard on my prior employment. The bottom line is we believe Ms. LeGrand was aware of the Franny resignation letter. It was addressed to her, for starters. Nikki Franny hand-delivered it to the CEO's office. Terry Wright handed the letter to Ms. LeGrand, but she said she didn't want to see it. And so Terry Wright proceeded to read the resignation letter out loud to Ms. LeGrand. As you will recall, the severance letter that she supposedly never saw demanded 3 months of severance. And then it said at the bottom, it would serve you and HART well to settle this issue and allow me to walk away with both of our reputations intact. Well, in fact, that's basically what happened. It was swept under the rug, and no severance agreement was prepared, no release was received, yet Nikki Franny received roughly $48,000 in severance pay for a resignation. Also, the HR staff, internal HR staff, started asking questions about this. Chandra Span said, I pulled Nikki's file, and I don't see a severance agreement. Did you receive anything? Her boss, Wanda Dunnigan, says there was no severance agreement that I'm aware of. She resigned, which of course makes typical common sense. It goes without without notice that unfortunately Ms. Spann and Ms. Dunnigan were two of the people who were laid off on November 9th after they started asking questions about Nikki Frenny. At the end of the day, on this part of the section, is Ms. LeGrand claims that basically I didn't know about these things and you can't really hold me responsible. But as you can see from her job description in the first paragraph, the CEO works under the authority granted by the board to lead, manage, and direct the agency and ensure program and fiscal accountability and legal compliance. To use colloquial terms, who's driving the bus? And from this board's perspective, it's supposed to be your CEO. It's clear either she was aware of these things, or if she wasn't aware of them, she should have been. Point 3, Ms. LeGrand had no reason to suspect Terry Wright was duly employed. As you'll recall, both of these women worked together at New Orleans Regional Transit Authority. Ms. Wright was the Director of Customer Service, and Ms. LeGrand was a contractor with TransDev and provided consulting services for approximately 3 years from 2016 to 2019. Somehow it's been explained that this email that she received was misconstrued by me. I think the words speak for themselves. I'm sorry to hear that Terry is no longer at Hart. Carita bumped into her at Norta. I believe that was enough to put Ms. LeGrand on notice that something was amiss with the remote work environment for Terry Wright. And the struggle that I had with this is that, look, Ms. LeGrand worked at Norta for 3 years. She knew the identity of every decision maker at Norta. She could have picked up the phone in 30 seconds and confirmed or denied this, but she didn't. As you know, Terry Wright was offered employment on March 3rd and with a start date of April 11th. And so you'll recall in my previous presentation, Terry Wright said, well, Ms. LeGrand found out about me leaving Hart before I could tell her on April 11th. And the way Ms. LeGrand found out, according to Ms. Wright, was that she went to a transit conference, and the vendors were talking about the fact that Terry was now going to be working at Norta. So you'll recall I went back and looked at the records, and sure enough, there was a transit conference on March 30th, approximately 10 days before Terry Wright joined Norta. And Ms. LeGrand was there, and so that provided some credence to Terry Wright's story. Ms. LeGrand no doubt admits knowing about the dual employment in October, and we've been through this before, but you recall Commissioner Neal basically said, we stole Terry from Tampa when he was chatting with a group of people. And Ms. LeGrand claimed that she didn't know that, and she was surprised by this disclosure. To her credit, she met face-to-face with Terry Wright on October 17th, which was the following Monday. It was a Hart Committee day, and per Ms. LeGrand, Terry Wright denied working at Norta. Again, she could have picked up the phone and figured that out one way or another. But in the rebuttal, CEO LeGrand claims that under Hart policy, she immediately put Ms. Wright on part-time status when she investigated the dual employment. The problem is that's just not true. If you look at Terry Wright's paycheck stubs, Terry Wright was not put on part-time status, and in fact, she was paid 80 hours for the time period between October 16th and October 29th. If you look at the paycheck stub in the upper right-hand corner, it identifies that time period. The pay date's 11/3, and you can see from the lower left, she was paid 50 hours of regular time and 30 hours of chief administrative leave. One would think that her boss, the CEO, would have had to approve the chief administrator leave. Let's look at the next pay period. Same thing. She was paid 8 hours a day between October 30th and November 7th when she resigned. If you look at the pay period in the upper right-hand corner, 10/30 through 11/12, pay date 11/7, and regular pay 48 hours at her regular rate. As you'll recall, she resigned on November 7th, but in order to figure out whether she was really paid on part-time or full-time, we have to get out the calendar. But if you get out the calendar, you'll see that in the first pay period on Monday, October 31st, she received 8 hours. Tuesday, 8 hours. Wednesday, 8 hours. Thursday, 8 hours. Friday, 8 hours. Nothing over the weekend. And then on her resignation date, 11/7/22, she received 8 hours. 6 working days, 8 hours a day. 6 times 8 is 48. What's her paycheck stub show? 48 hours. She was not working on a part-time basis. Next, what's the next thing that happens? She's paid again. between 11/13, 11/26, and the pay date was 12/1/2022. 12/1 is 24 days after she resigned from employment with HART. So if you look at this, the regular pay now, instead of being positive, is negative 75 hours to try and take back $7,200 of pay for Miss Wright. Well, the problem is that money had already been paid, so it was difficult to claw back. So I racked my brain thinking, what happened between November 13 and November 26 that would have caused this retroactive pay adjustment so that they could say she was put on part-time status? And what it was is that's when the newspaper article broke of Terry Wright holding 2 jobs. So if you go back and look at the paycheck stub, what they did is, since they couldn't claw back the money, they paid her out $23,348 of vacation pay, which of course she wasn't entitled to for the same reasons you're talking about with Ms. LeGrand today. She was under investigation, and you're not allowed to get your accruals when you're under investigation. And so anyway, there's no question that paying her vacation pay when she was working 2 jobs and under investigation violates HART policy. The reality is that she should have been suspended. HART's practice was to suspend people for serious misconduct. Here's a memo for the Director of Communications and Marketing that engaged in misconduct. It says, you're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending investigation. That's what should have happened with Terry Wright. You might ask yourself, well, what did NORTA do? The exact same thing. This letter is to notify you that you're being placed on administrative leave without pay effective immediately. So the bottom line is Ms. LeGrand should have immediately suspended Terry Wright. The fact that she didn't tends to lend credibility to Terry Wright's story. Instead, this board was told that she immediately placed Terry Wright on part-time status when she was really paid 8 hours a day all the way through November 7th, 2022. When the allegations are confirmed, CEO LeGrand should have fired Terry Wright. You may ask yourself, what did NORTA do? NORTA fired Terry Wright for working 2 jobs. But instead, Ms. LeGrand let Terry Wright resign effective November 7th, and HART improperly paid her roughly $23,000 in connection with that. So the other issue that I had with Ms. LeGrand is she withheld this information from the board. We know she learned about it on the 13th. At the APTA conference, Board Chair Kemp was there, but was not told about it. On the 17th, we had the committee meetings. Committee chair wasn't told about it. And worse yet, the full board on November 9th wasn't told about it. So Ms. LeGrand did not immediately put Terry Wright on, and then she didn't put her on part-time like she told the board, and instead paid her a bunch of money in severance. So basically, to wrap everything up, I believe the investigation findings have been affirmed. Number one, CEO LeGrand created an environment of fear and intimidation. There was no rebuttal to this point, so I consider it not contested. Second, the CEO's behavior caused abnormal turnover. As I've showed you, her turnover statistics in 22 were 10%. The administrative staff turnover was 27% for a total turnover of 57%, just like was reported in the newspaper. Number three, agency communication is terrible because people are afraid to speak up. This wasn't rebutted at all, and I consider it affirmed. Last-minute layoffs, quits, and severance packages violated HART policy and state law. I presented that. You can come to your own conclusions. Lastly, CEO LeGrand knew or should have known of Terry Wright's dual employment as early as May 3rd and was dishonest after the scandal was reported by saying that she was put on part-time basis when she should have been suspended. So that concludes my response to a reply to the rebuttal points that were contained in Mr. Wenzel's April 25th letter.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You stole my thunder. I actually pulled all of Miss Wright's paycheck stubs and was going to bring up the same point later on, that she was in fact not placed on part-time status. She was placed on chief administrative leave. One thing that I wasn't able to conclude, because I only pulled paycheck stubs back until March, when it seemed that Ms. LeGrand possibly knew about it, is that if you look at the year-to-date line items on chief administrative leave,
okay,
she had actually been paid some chief administrative leave prior to all of these paycheck stubs in October, and I wasn't able to get a clear answer about why she was put on chief administrative leave prior to her accepting an offer at NORTA in April, but she had clearly already received $3,557.69, which would have been seemingly, I don't know, about a day. I'm not sure. But yeah, not only did she not get put on part-time, they actually gave her a raise, coincidentally. It looks like they let the 93 go to the 96, so.
And if you look at the final paycheck, you'll see that they made a retirement contribution of roughly $5,000 to the Florida retirement system, which of course you're not entitled to. If you're on part-time status, you don't get the benefits.
So we don't know, though, why she received already a day of chief administrative leave prior to, it looks like right before.
How much was it?
$3,557.69. Ms. LeGrand had already put her on right seemingly around the time that she was accepting a contract at NORTA. So I couldn't get that answer. Maybe Mrs. Kirk could supply that at some point if we have to keep going.
Yeah, I know that she took a week of vacation somewhere between the April and
yeah, but that was all covered on the regular vacation line item. Chief administrative leave is directly from Ms. LeGrand placing them at her stead on leave. So this is a punitive line item, it appears. So I'm very curious about what that looming day is prior to. I should have collected the whole year, but.
punitive line item we get paid?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we might be doing right now, so.
Any other questions?
Board Member Williams, go ahead.
Mr. Adams, you mentioned March 30th, 2022. There was awareness of.
If I said that, I meant May. Excuse me. It's the email that was received by Ms. LeGrand in May. Okay. So if I said March, I misspoke. Excuse me.
March 30th, 2022. There was a reference in your document.
Okay, so let me take a look. Do you recall about where it was?
About 3/4 through. I just think that may be some reference to Commissioner Warsaw, what he was saying, March 30th. Because there was a reference of March 30th, there was awareness as early as that date. Then we went to May 3rd. I just wanted to confirm if that was the case.
Yeah, I heard him say that, but I don't have any evidence that she knew as of March 30th. I believe Ms. Wright moved from her Tampa apartment in like the April 8th timeframe. And at or around that time, Ms. C.O. LeGrand's story is that Ms. Wright came to her and said, I need to go back to New Orleans to take care of a sick family member. I need to work remotely for a period of time. And so that might have been somewhere in the March 30th timeframe, but I don't know the exact details.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No one else? Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Mr. Adams, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Ms. Townsend. Could you show us the last slide, the 5 summary points you had? I think it was the one before that.
Yeah, hang on. That one?
The summary. Yeah, I think it's that one. Just so I can connect the dots here.
Sure.
Would all of those support a for-cause termination? That's what I'm trying to determine. Which of these bullet points support a for-cause termination, or do all of them?
Yeah, so I'll tell you kind of the way I view the roles of the people who are before you today. I feel like I'm a witness. I was asked to go out and figure out what was going on, and I've done that to the best of my ability. Mr. Smith, of course, is in charge of process, and he tells you how to handle this and what to do and when to do it. Mm-hmm. And then I believe that litigation counsel probably needs to advise you on how the law is applied to the facts as I've described them. So I think it might be better for Ms. Townsend to address that particular issue.
Thank you.
Okay.
Board Member
Owen.
Owen.
For me?
One more, just to follow up that, so we're clear. But you are in a position to say whether or not this conduct after your investigation violated HART policy, whether it breached the employment agreement, and whether it violated Florida statute, in your opinion after the investigation.
Yeah, so I have a notebook that I'll hand out that has a copy of the presentation in it, has a copy of the employment contract, has a copy of the job description, and it has the policies that I think are relevant to your determination. I just summarized the ones that I thought were relevant and arguably could have been violated.
Right.
And
Do you
so
have
I
that
can hand
page?
those out now or
Yeah.
at the conclusion of the meeting, whatever you prefer.
Do you have that page number in case other board members want to see that exact page number? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, well, there's 3 tabs in here
Okay.
in the notebook, and so
Yep.
it's under tab 3,
3.
and it's the first 3 pages.
Great.
And I can hand those out whenever the board chair prefers.
Great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. And for our council, before we invite Mr. Wenzel up, are there any updates on the research or?
Clear, Julia stole my microphone. We were correct. She's not entitled to that kind of pay if it leaves during a period of investigation.
Okay.
So that money is not due.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay. And nothing further, we will invite Ms. LeGrand's counsel.
You can pass out the notebook just so you have it.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Refer to it.
And Mr. Wenzel, before you begin, sir, roughly how much time do you think you'll need?
I'm going to be brief,
Okay. How do you define brief, just so that we know?
15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, good.
At
Thank
most.
you, sir. Thank you very much.
My third executive director, CEO of HART, in the course of the last 10 years or so. I've appeared before this board twice, and what I notice about all of the different executive directors is the problem's always the same. And I will summarize that problem, and then we can move on, because it seems that the die has been cast. It is noteworthy that HART has had to have 8 CEOs in a decade. Did every board make 8 bag hires? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with the organization that must be cured by management or legislation or some combination of both? Ms. LeGrand was hired with 3 goals: change the culture, improve productivity, and address the instability of the finances. Improving productivity means people have to work harder. It's true in General Motors. It's true in TikTok. It's true at HART. The organization is overstaffed administratively, which in turn is part of the problem of financial instability. To assist in establishing a benchmark, this board, at Ms. LeGrand's suggestion, brought in a consultant from the American Public Transportation Association. That is the preeminent group of organizations such as this one on a national basis. There were extensive interviews of people who worked at HART in leadership roles. And let me give you some excerpts from the analysis of the leaders of HART. And these are in a public record that I obtained as part of my public records search. Here's one. She did not clearly convey how she fostered meaningful relationships with elected officials and could not fully demonstrate that she meets the core essential job functions of the Director of Governmental Relations. Here's another one. She could not show how she met the essential job requirements listed in the job description provided by HART. Here's another. As so, it was difficult to ascertain the essence of her overall leadership role within the department and how her day-to-day activities parallel the essential job functions listed in the job description. Another one. Overall, his presentation did note some activities that met some of the essential job functions. Still another. He could not articulate the roles of his subordinates. Major position here at Hart. And I could go further, but the point is, this has been and remains a badly broken organization. And Mr. Adams made a point about how many positions had been eliminated. That's what happens when you try to improve productivity. You get rid of people, you don't hire replacements, you put those tasks on others who therefore are busier. Organizational change is difficult. I've watched it in both the city and to some extent the county here. I participated in it at USF when the decision was made for it to become a research institution. We let 700 people go with the approval of the governor's office and the Florida Board of Regents because they did not contribute to that mission. Not one of those 700 that certainly that I know of was happy or joyful or would have been supportive of the two different presidents that I served during that process. It's not easy to go from where an organization starts to where it needs to be in today's 21st century world. I had the privilege of leading a hospital organization in a small community. The custom there was that they didn't register as patients their family members. They simply gave them a bed assignment, made sure they got all the nursing and the food and the medicine that they needed. But we don't do that to family members. They get free care. That's the kind of problem that a CEO has in an organization that needs to be led in a different direction. And nobody's happy that people are unhappy. But change needs to be made, and it needs to be fundamental and meaningful. There was a discussion about the severance pay in relation to the annual budget savings. What you didn't hear was the $1.2 million savings was permanent. It's that year less the severance, and the next year in full, and the next year in full, and the next year in full. So while $500,000 or so may have been paid to achieve a $1.2 million savings, the savings is $1.2 million times the number of years in the organization's future. Let me turn to the Terry Wright thing, and I'll tell you that while Ms. Townsend and Mr. Smith have been very accommodating and collegial, I had to fight very hard for an email, not that they were not providing it, but that it wasn't being provided to them. There is an email. It is in the material that I have electronically filed today, in which it is clear that Terry Wright was to be put on part-time status on the 16th of October, 2 days after Ms. LeGrand learned of it. Now, I can't explain why people don't do what they're told to do. But I can show you that Ms. LeGrand learned on the 13th at a convention, came back, she talked to Commissioner Kemp, she made the change. And the change was supposed to be effective, part-time, effective the 16th. But it's like a little like the severance that was given. That severance was not authorized. There's not a piece of paper or a person that says that Ms. LeGrand authorized that severance to the employee who resigned. It's simply somebody paid somebody, gave somebody something that was in variance with our policy. And you can't run an 800 employee organization where every decision comes to the top. CEOs set a direction, and other people are assigned the task of implementing that direction. And that seems to be a consistent failure over the decade or so that I've been representing executive directors and CEOs. The person that makes change is never welcomed. And many change agents in our management literature come, make changes over a few years, and move on. And they are people whose career is making changes. And then other people come in and they are stable leaders and they lead and they stay. But inevitably there is some significant tension and some sacrifice and some suffering associated with bringing an organization into the 21st century that operates in accordance with policies and rules. The Nikki Freeney severance, there's not a piece of paper tying Ms. LeGrand to that. There's not a conversation tying her to that. She didn't violate 215 in doing that. You know, I've lived in Tampa since 1956. So many good things have happened. The one thing that never gets fixed is public transportation. When I came here, you went to the end of Franklin Street and it was a ship because the port came all the way around the city like that. And the city pumped its sewage into the bay. And the downtown was blighted. And there's been so much progress under so many good mayors, and the county as well. And what we never get is transportation right. And, you know, whether it's clearly not going to be under Ms. LeGrand's leadership, but respectfully, she has not done anything that warrants a cause termination. The organization and Ms. LeGrand need to turn in a new direction, each of them independently. And for that reason, we stand ready to negotiate if we can, or if we can't, we will be rehashing these issues for a while. And that's probably not good for either side, but that's what inevitably our legal system forces us to do. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I see Mayor Castro raise her hand. Before I recognize the mayor, I want to just put for the record that we received a May 2nd, 2023 response to David Adams' March 27th, 2023 presentation followed by Mr. Stephen Wenzel, just for the record. Thank you, sir. And nothing else for remarks, correct?
Nothing else. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, sir. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. I think Mr. Wenzel has made some good points. Clearly, there are systemic issues within HART that haven't been able to been remedied in however many 8 CEOs. I also want to take some exception with some of the findings from Mr. Adams. The performance audit that you referenced, the beginning of that performance audit says that HART maintains an organizational structure that has clearly defined units, minimizes overlapping functions, and has no excessive administrative layers. That's one of the things that we brought the CEO in for, was to change this organization and to change the leadership in the administrative chart. And a lot of the positions, I also agree that, I don't know if it was 1.2 million, but that there was a savings in eliminating some of those positions. And so I think that that we do have to recognize that we brought the CEO in to change this organization, and she did make some changes that aren't always met with open arms. But also, I think that some of those individuals, some of the complaints, of the work environment and those types of things that really cannot be quantified. Not that I say they're true or they're untrue. It's just difficult to quantify those types of things. If someone's position has been eliminated, then clearly they're not going to be happy about that. So some of those, I don't think that we should pile on in some of these instances. But, and also with the layoffs, with the All for Transportation, I know that it was associated, a lot of those layoffs were associated with the loss of the All for Transportation funding that was going to come to HART. And those in-organizational changes aren't something that you sit down and discuss with everyone. You make decisions as a CEO, and those decisions you move forward with. But what I cannot really agree with or bring myself to see any exception for the way that the Terry Wright situation went down. So for that reason right there, I think that that is the one, that and the severance package, those two issues for me are the ones that can be quantified and are unacceptable for a CEO at an organization like HART. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Commissioner Owen, then Commissioner Wassel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Counsel, I found your argument not compelling at all. You kind of used examples of University of South Florida, personal examples of working at a hospital, which have nothing to do with this. And it's even harder for me to wrap my mind around that there is some type of rogue employee pushing buttons, throwing severance packages around outside of the CEO's knowledge. That, for me, is extremely hard for me to wrap my mind around. I guess I would ask you today, if the CEO had nothing to do with any type of violation of Florida statute that we referenced today, could you tell us today who did, who was in charge of?
Well, it had to be somebody in human resources and somebody in the payroll function. I've not been able to get access to records because they were withheld from me under the statute that says the investigation's ongoing. So I haven't got the things I'd want to look at to answer your question.
Okay.
I think in most large organizations, there's a bunch of stuff people do that is not at the fingertips of the CEO. In this, the city, the county, the state, Anheuser-Busch, whatever.
Who would you say is ultimately responsible, though, for those decisions? Or you're at a law firm. If you have a paralegal who makes a mistake or an attorney that works under you, who ultimately is responsible for those mistakes?
Well, I think a law firm's a little different because we're individually licensed. In an organization, her job is not to make every decision. Her contract says she sets direction. And if people go off direction, there's not much she can do absent hearing about it and then dealing with it. And when she deals with it, you all, meaning the organization, labels her as punitive and demanding and unresponsive or whatever the different words are.
Okay. Well, I'll listen to some of the other board comments, but that is something extremely hard for me to wrap my mind around, that the CEO has nothing to do or gives no input, nor severance package can be given out without her knowledge. I've never heard of such a thing, but I'll sit back and listen to some other board members. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Wassel, then Board Member Upshaw Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hopefully, I keep pointing to one of the sections of the policy manual that I think at this time it'll clear up some comments from Madam Mayor and also some questions from Commissioner Owen. May I ask for consent to read the first two paragraphs of Chapter 140.02? The Chief Executive Officer shall be the Chief Staff Officer of HART, shall be appointed by and serve at the pleasure of the Board. The CEO shall be responsible for implementation of all policies established by HART. The CEO shall be responsible for the maintenance and operation of the physical facilities of HART. The CEO shall maintain such records as may be required in the performance of his or her duties upon request of the Board. The CEO may employ such other employees as may be necessary for the proper administration of duties and functions of HART delegated to the CEO by the board, including determination of the qualifications of such persons. And this is what will clear up the suggestions from Madam Mayor. Provided, however, that the board of directors of HART shall approve the number of employee positions and fix the compensation of employees. I yield the floor.
Which is what you do in your annual budget.
And what I guess the main response is that we allowed a 5-week delay of alleged exculpatory evidence, and what we were left with was personal stories from 1956. We all know that the residents of East Tampa desperately need a functioning bus service. We know that, and we're working towards that. But the person that was chose to provide that and fix it did not do that, and in fact did just the opposite. So I don't find your personal examples and pulling on the heartstrings compelling. We wanted facts about how she didn't violate Chapter 215 of the Florida statute, and she did, in fact, clearly defined by her own policies, as she was responsible for all of those policies as the CEO of HART, right? Chapter 140.02?
Disagree. Or every CEO works through a chain of command. Every organization has a chain of command. CEO sits at the top. Chief Financial Officer has a bunch of functions. CEO's not in charge of CFO. Typically, CFO reports to the board. All CEOs can do is try to have the right people in the right places doing the right things. You can't police every transaction. She doesn't get to sign every check. She doesn't have a button to push for every payroll check that needs to go out.
So the exculpatory evidence is to point the finger at everyone except for herself.
Exculpatory evidence is that if the legal standard is you all have to demonstrate cause, that requires her to have some personal responsibility or involvement.
Okay. I yield the floor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. And before I recognize Board Member Upshaw Frazier, I wanted to clarify something, Mr. Wenzel, you said, at least I believe you said you're here to negotiate. So are y'all, not to get you in a public statement on this, but is your final number the 110, or are you willing to negotiate from that?
No, our final number for negotiation purposes is 110. Mm-hmm. I don't care how it's comprised.
Okay.
Okay, and that's meaningless in terms of whether it's this bucket or that bucket. Mm-hmm. But the number is the 110 number.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Ma'am, go ahead.
So that was my question.
Oh,
so I just want to clarify. So unless it's 110, there's no point in even coming back with any other number below 110.
Well,
I just want to understand where the hard line
I have
is.
authority from Ms. LeGrand, after we had some conversation among council, to do 110. If there's 107, that's a different thing that I'd have to go back to Ms. LeGrand about.
So there is room for negotiation then?
I'm
not asking if you have a set authority amount. I'm saying you're open to negotiation, your client is. You're willing to hear other offers.
Yeah, but I have an assessment of what this case is worth in court. That's what I'm, asked to do, is tell clients what their case is worth in court. And we're pretty confident that 110 would hold. That's why we made the offer in the interest of getting it done. And we took out fees because they're not in the contract. So I'm trying to give the 60-day mutual agreement option.
Board Member Knight.
For clarification, Chair, the CFO is hired by the CEO. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. What did you ask?
The CFO is hired by the CEO.
It's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
May I address that?
Yes, sir.
My point is that we bring in people and give them leadership roles and job descriptions. And then people at that level are largely independent. I'm confident that the police chief doesn't come in and talk to Mayor Castor about everything the police chief wants to do in the police department. I'm sure major issues get discussed. And that's just an example of how organizations work. It's not like somebody sitting up here and every decision comes to them and they say yes, no, or maybe. People have independent specters of authority pursuant to job descriptions. They're supposed to get things done and they're supposed to obey the law and the policy of the organization in their decisions. It's not that somebody said, well, let's give Nikki Freeney money. And Ms. LeGrand said, oh, that's a good idea, even though she resigned.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Did I interrupt you?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, sir. And before we go to Mr. Adams, do you have any further comments or anything, sir? Just to you, Mr. Wenzel.
No, I think that concludes my remarks here.
Okay, great. Thank you. We appreciate you, sir. Mr. Adams, any rebuttal at all, sir? Or response, I should say?
Yeah, just very briefly. Thank you.
Can I borrow your chair?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Board Member Williams, I realize what you were talking about, the March 30th. The March 30 was the APTA conference where Ms. LeGrand attended. And you may recall from the original presentation that Ms. Wright said that Ms. LeGrand found out that she had taken the Norta job at or around that time through scuttlebutt at the conference.
Right.
Now, Ms. LeGrand denies that, but I just want to make sure I clarified that. And as I said, when I have conflicting testimony, I try to look at records and other things that try to, corroborate things one way or another. And that was one of the things I was able to find that helped with, Ms. Wright's version of the story. But frankly, as I sit here today, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there.
Thank you.
Just briefly, the comments that were read by Ms. LeGrand's counsel, were from the APTA report, which you may recall was withheld from this board for several months after it was issued. And I found that to be problematic. With regards to Nikki Freeney, you're right. I have not been able to find any piece of paper where Ms. LeGrand authorized that. Counsel's correct in that. But I also received through a lot of the interviews that Ms. LeGrand did not like public records and didn't like to create public records, and in certain instances specifically told people not to create public records. So it doesn't surprise me that the smoking gun email or memo isn't there, but just in common sense, the letter from Nikki Freeney was frankly very offensive, and it was very bombastic. And there was motivation, there could have been motivation to not have that hit the streets. And so that's my point on that. Board Member Owen, one of the reasons why it was difficult to navigate the layoff was that people in HR were in fact laid off. The director of HR and one of the key members of the HR staff were laid off. And so it was difficult to manage the layoff, even though I do agree with Board Member Castor that sometimes those are sensitive matters and you don't have a lot of time. But my interview of Ms. LeGrand said that she spent several weeks, mid-October through November 9th, planning the layoffs. And I would have thought that at least some of that would have been written down via email, text message, or otherwise. And that's all I have to say, unless there are any other questions.
Nothing else. Anything else? Okay, being none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we go to Mr. Smith, who will lead the board through, or board thought on action for CEO investigation. Go ahead, sir.
A couple of comments that I think the board wants to hear, I'll get to in a minute. But one of the things I will also indicate, you had a comment by Mr. Wenzel about the CFO reporting to the board. Sadly, that's not the case. And as we will discuss as we go in the future, part of the problem is this board does not get good information. This is not a business board like the Aviation Authority. This is an oversight board with elected officials responsible to the community. You need to have better, more thorough information. As I know from my days as a city attorney, there's two breaks in the system. That is two things that slow it down: the legal office and the accounting or audit office. You need to have direct input, and the general counsel needs to not be frozen out of information as well, so you get good data. But that's for another day. Today, you have to decide what you're going to do, and in order to assist you in that effort, I've asked Ms. Townsend to help you understand conceptually what termination for cause may mean, so you know whether you have grounds for that or not. Thank you. And by the way, Julia's prepared a resolution that has a list of a variety of things from do nothing to terminate for cause. So you can take action today if you find consensus.
And Mayor Castor.
Mr. Smith,
Yes, yes,
I have a quick question. You stated before that the 110 from Mr. Wenzel, that offer didn't include a resignation. It was a one-time, because the resignation doesn't allow for the vacation annual accrued leave. So what are we supposed to call it?
Initially, it tracks the contract, which is a resignation under the contract. But Mr. Wenzel has made it clear it's a number more so than a conceptual argument. He has authority to settle at 110. The problem was, under the contract, you are not in a position, well, you're free to do things, I guess, violative of your policy, but under your policy, you would not pay the $54,000 of accrued vacation time. So the number would be the lower number. And so they adjusted their position to say, you don't have to think about it in terms of resignation. Think about it in terms of dollar amounts. We're looking for $110,000. It can be a lump sum payment, but that's the number they're currently looking for. And as you heard through the questioning by Ms. Frazier, there's possibly some room there, but right now he doesn't have authority for anything else.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have Ms. Townsend present to you conceptually what the issues might be.
So the employment agreement with Ms. LeGrand is what's going to guide us in determining whether just cause exists for terminating her. And pursuant to Section 6A of the employment agreement, there are 8 bulleted items that gives guidance as to what types of acts constitute just cause for termination. The first bulleted item, item I, says it's misconduct by the employee as defined in Section 443.036 Florida statutes. And pursuant to the definition of misconduct in that statute, really what it's looking at is a willful, intentional, and deliberate standard of misconduct by Ms. LeGrand. The other bulleted portion of the, which is Section 2, says the employee's willful, deliberate, and intentional breach of duties, obligations, or policies of HART, which basically mirror the definition of misconduct as defined in that prior statute I just mentioned. There is also a third option that says the employee's willful, deliberate, and intentional violation of Part 2, Chapter 112 Florida statutes, which is the public records law, the Code of Ethics for Public Officers and Employees. Another additional grounds which constitutes just cause under the agreement is the employee's continued neglect of duties or obligations required of the chief executive officer after written notice of same. So that, I believe, contemplates if there has been something that the board has determined she has done wrong, they provided written notice to her and she fails to correct her actions based on those written notice, then that could also constitute just cause for termination. Employees' continued violation of HART's written rules and policies, including any codes of conduct, the employee handbooks, any board policies, etc., after she receives written notice of the same. Additionally, if she commits any criminal act amounting to a felony or any act of moral turpitude while employed as the CEO, irrespective of whether she's prosecuted for such action. 2 additional grounds include her conviction of an illegal act in her public or private capacity involving theft, fraud, misappropriation, or embezzlement of funds. And finally, the employee's engagement in acts which would constitute grounds for immediate dismissal of any employee by HART under HART's policies that are now existing or may be subsequently enacted. In looking at these, I think, item 1, little 1, subsection 2, and possibly subsection 8 are the ones that may apply in this situation for the board's consideration. That is based on the board of directors making their decision on the facts that have been presented by Mr. Adams's investigation. The policies that he has indicated may have possibly been violated by his findings in the investigation. So I would say that the standard for willful, deliberate, and intentional breach of duties, that is a much higher standard. That means that Ms. LeGrand, we would contemplate that Ms. LeGrand deliberately set out to engage in the acts that she's accused of it was not a mere oversight, it was not mere negligence in performing her duties, but you have to find that it was wanton, willful, intentional, deliberate, all of those things in order to support a just cause termination under either little subsection 1 or 2. Alternatively, there is subsection 8, which of course talks about a violation of HART's policies without taking into account whether it was deliberate or willfully done.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions, comments? Okay. I believe potential resolutions are.
Julia has taken HART's standard resolution format and has created an opportunity to take whichever it is this board decides and put it in a written format. So really what I think needs to be done is this board needs to begin its deliberation and decide what they think is appropriate in light of all the facts and circumstances and argument they've heard today and the information they have before them that they have reviewed. And if there's any questions in that regard, we'll try to help you. But I think you understand the policies at issue. You understand the behaviors that have occurred. And if in light of that understanding, you believe there have been violations, intentional violations of HART policies as described by Ms. Townsend, then you can move in one direction. If you don't believe so, then you would move in a different direction. I can't make the decision. It's inappropriate for me to say that, but I think you understand what you have to do. You've got the facts, you've got the policies, and I think you have an understanding of what the issues are. But if there's any questions in that regard, we'll try to elaborate. But now it's time for you guys to talk among yourselves and figure out where you are.
Thank you, sir. Board Member Upshaw Frazier.
I'm not sure if you can tell us this, Ms. Townsend, but when we started, before we heard any of the presentation from the parties, it was your recommendation that we try and resolve this, just given the uncertain nature of litigation. Is that still your recommendation after hearing both sides?
Yes, that is still my recommendation, and I think, I know that before when we made our counteroffer, we were looking at it and tracking the language of the statute, and now that we've had a rejection of that offer and a counter proposal from them where they're saying, just give us a lump sum payment of $110, because I think by them putting that to us, it eliminates the consideration or lack of consideration of whether or not she's entitled to the accrued leave benefits via resignation. So that really is what the board has to also consider, because I do not believe there was any action taken in response to that as well.
Thank you.
And if I may build on that, and I'll recognize Commissioner Wassel as well. So for the accrued leave and the non-entitlement to that, that is an issue that could be in dispute. And if they were to secure entitlement of that through the court system, would they be entitled to attorney fees in addition to that for their time spent?
If that were to happen, yes.
Okay. But it's your, and not to put you on the spot, I know what that's like, but it's your position presently today that this $54,000 would not be due and owing contractually. They would not be entitled to that, correct?
Correct, according to HART's policy, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one thing that the board hasn't got to hear is, the jeopardy that we would be in, but also understand the opposing side would be under the exact same amount of pressure. So they have the exact amount of pressure to avoid any potential litigation. Things that would happen in a courtroom is probably likely subpoenas of Mrs. Wright and Mrs. Nikki Freeney. So those are all things to keep in mind. What I would like, and I hope this is extremely reasonable, is that right now the individual has received about $30,000, let's just call it $30,000 of free pay for the past 5 weeks, waiting for this boardroom meeting to happen. I would be curious if the board agreed and the opposing side agreed that if they calculate that amount in that she's already received, along with the $56,000 that was offered, and we cover half of her attorney fees at $10,000, would that be an acceptable offer? That they make it retroactive to the day that she was suspended with pay?
And what would the total monetary amount for that be, if you can do?
We can figure it out, but it'd be somewhere close to the ballpark of 110.
Okay. So let's, how about this? How about we present that as a motion, if there's a second, and then we can formally present it to Mr. Wenzel. If Mr. Smith, would that be the correct way to go?
I just want to make sure everybody understands the offer. I believe what Commissioner Wastel is saying is part of that 110 is the 30,000 she's already been paid. No?
We're not making the 110. That we're making it the 56,000 plus half of her attorney fees of another 10,000, retroactive back to the date to include whatever amount she's been paid for suspension with pay. Whatever date that was, whatever that amount is, plus the 66,000 that we're adding on today. That's her total compensation.
Okay. I'm unclear as to what the retroactivity is. Are you paying her?
From the day that she was suspended with pay.
Right, but are you, and how are you counting that 30,000?
I'm saying we can figure out that number. I don't know the exact amount that she's been paid in 5 weeks. It's somewhere around 30,000 though, I believe.
And you'd recommend she be paid that's all she gets paid from here forward, plus the 10,000 for attorney.
I'm saying that's the total buyout, that I want her to include that in this compensation, that it was retroactive to the day. That amount plus the 56,000 that was proposed earlier, plus half of her attorney fees of $10,000.
Yeah, so in essence, that's already, she's received that, so that's part of the 110.
That's right.
I got you.
So if I may, so the way I understand that is, it's essentially a $66,000 offer. Am I reading?
To include, for her to
Yes.
accept the fact that from the day that she was suspended with pay, that additional amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I was thinking total for what Mr. Walsh was saying is probably about 95,000. If you retro back to the beginning, plus the 56, close to 95.
Thank you, sir.
And 10,000.
Commissioner Owen. And Mayor Cass.
And I'll probably support this last one, but I just want to tell this board that after hearing argument of counsel, I think they're in a worse position than they were when we made our first offer. I've been in federal court. It's not the easiest place to be in. It's a battle of the motions, and judges kind of make decisions without a lot of oral arguments. But I do think that the argument put forth by counsel, it just doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold weight to me. I would feel very confident in a litigated case with the facts that are presented before us now. So I'm saying this just so everyone kind of here knows loud and clear. If we're going to do one type of counter offer against ourselves, because that's in essence what we're doing, the next one I'm going to make a motion on. So I'll second yours, but
okay.
I'm
happy to withdraw if you.
Mayor Castro, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we all, I don't have the confidence in the litigation. Sorry, you never know what's going to happen in a courtroom in my experience. But I would say to make the math a little simpler and close to it, we as a board, I think it's unanimous that we feel that this relationship has got to be severed. And it's better to get it over with sooner rather than later, and without drawing out through litigation. If we split what is asked and what we have offered and give that, it's somewhere, my math isn't great, but somewhere around 84,000, and just end it right there. And I don't know, 66,000 was what was added up with Commissioner Wastel's offer, but I don't think that that's an exact number.
It's all an estimate. It's half of her proposed attorney's fees. I'm just saying that we should be cognizant of the fact that she's already been paid $30,000, and she should accept that as part of her severance of that 110. So I'm moving. I think that my offer is moving more than halfway.
Okay.
Anyone else? And one thing I'll say for that is I do think it's incumbent on us to negotiate right now, and I hope that Mr. Wenzel and his client are open to that, because we have to be good. There's two issues here, and I don't think they're competing, which is we have to be good stewards of the principles of accountability that this board wants to have, and I think we can achieve that while also being good stewards of the public's tax dollars. And if we go forward on a ride where there's no getting off potentially of litigation through some sort of federal action, the funds spent trouble me. They really do. When we could potentially end this early, and I think we can balance them. I think through an offer we can do that. I just hope that Ms. LeGrand's counsel and Ms. LeGrand are open to negotiating. So we have a motion on the floor. Anyone else? We have a second motion. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What are the motions? Are there two motions? One from Mayor Castro, one from...
So, did you do a substitute motion, or
I did not
didn't
do a
hear it as
substitute
such?
motion.
Okay.
I just brought up the idea of splitting the difference. And I don't know if we can we vote on a motion that we don't know exactly what the
It
amount
would be
is?
better if we have a specific number, but I believe I understand what Commissioner Wastel is saying, which is starting with the 110 number, but taking into account she's been paid 30. That means we're looking at 80,000 of new dollars compared to the 110 they're looking for. So that's a $30,000 lower offer than where they last were. So you are moving in a different direction. Your number of 84 is not materially different, but I do think it would be good to have a number, and I think what Mr. Wastel's argument is she's received 30,000 already.
Yeah.
So let's give her the 110 minus the 30, that's 80. So I believe that's exactly the number he's talking about.
And then half of the attorney fees?
That
10?
And then half the
Is that
attorney's
part of
fees,
it?
I guess, that would
Okay.
include, I'd make it 90 then, wouldn't it?
Okay.
No,
So
I'm saying, yeah, total. The offer, so the 30,000 plus the 56 that was offered more, and will also cover half of her 10,000. That means that our total all in at that point it is around $96,000.
Gotcha.
So she's at this point, I feel like if they can accept that it was retroactive, that they're almost splitting hairs.
Okay, so really you're talking about 96,000 in new dollars, for lack of a better way to characterize it.
I don't think so.
No, it's 66.
Yeah, I don't think so.
66.
Oh,
Yeah.
66.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. What the Commissioner Wassel is stating is $56,000 was previously offered, half of the attorney's fees, which is about $11,000, $22,000 in attorney's fees, and then for Ms. LeGrand and her counsel to take the $30,000 or so that was paid since the last hearing to today as part of that offer. So it's $66,000 roughly, if I'm correct. And yes, sir. And I'll Commissioner or Board Member Hudson, go ahead. And
I just think we should only talk about new money, just for everyone's.
I agree.
66, yeah, that's
66. Are you comfortable, Commissioner Wassel, with stating at 66,000?
Yeah, I just want to
Okay.
make people aware of the 30.
Yes, sir. Yeah, how you got there. Okay. So we have a motion by Commissioner Wassel, seconded by Commissioner Owen. Roll call, please.
Chair Viera?
Yes.
Director Owen?
Yes.
Director Williams? Yes. Director Kastner?
Yes.
Director Frazier?
Yes.
Director Hudson?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Yes.
Director Kemp? Director Knight?
Yes.
Director Myers?
Yes.
Director Wolstel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously, sir.
Okay. So, Mr. Smith, I would assume probably the smart thing to do would be to take a recess for 5 minutes. Okay. While this is communicated. Okay. Thank you very much. We shall return at 3:19.
That's a problem. There you go. That still holds its value. And it's used. Yeah, this is an amazing product right here. This is the only one I've ever seen in real life. Okay, well, there you go. And I do remember that ice pick thing.
For at least a certain period of time?
I was going to have Ms. Mandel go through our options while Mr. Wenzel and his client are going through some issues, I believe. And to keep this train moving forward, I was going to have Ms. Mandel just go through our options.
Thank you, and this will explain why I've been frenetically running around over the last hour. What we have done is, as we previously discussed, per the employment agreement, action needs to be taken via resolution. So without specifically delineating what your action is going to be, I will tell you there are 2 resolutions which are prepared for consideration, and if there needs to be a third consideration, that's always an option because the form of the resolution is ready to go. At this juncture, there is a resolution which would provide for termination for cause with the attenuated requirements and findings placed within it, as well as the documents that we've discussed today. And previous meetings, there is also a second resolution, which if we do get to a place where the settlement offer which you have provided and presented is accepted, or there is another settlement negotiation that occurs, would provide for that settlement along with the obligation that a settlement agreement with appropriate releases is provided. So you have those 2. The third option is a termination not for cause. I haven't heard any conversation as a result of that, and I'm not really sure that that is part of the conversation. But as you have heard previously, that's certainly another option. And if there is a termination not for cause, but just a termination, there's obligations under the employment agreement, which would, in essence, set forth how that process would look like. It would require a resolution as well, but it's really delineated more specifically in the employment agreement. The only other thing I wanted to say is that depending on how this goes, because obviously this has been an interesting afternoon, if in fact there was a previous settlement offer that was made, you now have made a counter offer, my recommendation would be, if that isn't accepted, that you go, and there is not a place of settlement here, that your first motion that you make, and this can be done via motion, is to reject any of the settlement offers that have been made. Or if we don't go there, obviously we've got the resolution, but just from a procedural perspective, I think it would be the cleanest option is, if there is no settlement that does occur today, to reject all the settlement offers that have been made and then proceed forward with your next step, which would be a decision on what the findings would be for a termination for cause, if that's the direction. If it's a termination not for cause, that's just a simple motion and you follow the agreement, and a resolution can be prepared for that. Or, as I've said, if this does get settled, there's a resolution prepared with that information.
Thank you, ma'am. Mayor Castor. Did you? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought. Commissioner Owen, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so the resolution has a bunch of blank spaces in it, I take it. Is that?
Well, I've been frenetically ensuring that those are prepared and ready to go.
Okay.
So all of the pieces are in place. Whatever decision you make, it's ready to go. And if we have to change out a number or we have to change out a finding, we can go ahead and
So if we don't come to a settlement, it'd be technically a motion to reject the settlement, see how that goes. Then would a motion to adopt, I guess what I'm saying is, would there be a motion to adopt one of a prepared resolution, or a motion specifically that's broad for cause, or?
What I would like to have you do is make a motion. Let's say, for the sake of argument, and I'm not prejudging your decision, but just for explanation purposes, it's a motion to terminate for cause. I'd like you to delineate in that motion what it doesn't have to be the specific findings, but what those sections that were discussed specifically and recommended by outside employment counsel, and I believe there was a presentation which pointed you towards subsection 1, Romanet I, and Romanet 8 in the employment agreement, which is in outside litigation counsel's opinion would most be appropriate given the evidence and testimony that you've heard both today and at your previous hearing, and also given the packet of information, and I think this is very important that we identify, and that will be part of the resolution, the information that was provided by Ms. LeGrand's attorney today, that was part of your consideration.
Okay, well, I guess I don't know about that, the way that you're framing that, for us as a board to be very, very specific as to, their legal terms of art. I believe you could say for breach of the employment agreement, violation of Florida statutes, violation of HART policy. Rather than, if you give specifics, you may be held to that standard possibly in litigation. So I don't want to hand tie.
The
We're not allowed
resolution's
to-
drafted very, very, very generally, so you can, I was just sort of making specific, I was just making statements of possible things you could say as part of a very generic, it's a very generic, when I say generic, again, I recognize this is part of a potential ongoing record. When I say generic, what I mean is that the basis of any decision that you make is based upon the referencing to Mr. Adams' report, the investigations, and the evidence and testimony that he's provided both previous to you and today. And it also took into consideration the evidence and testimony that you also received by Ms. LeGrand, both in the form of the testimony by, or the argument by Mr. Wenzel, as well as the document that he has presented, which is why I made sure to have that submitted to you and made part of the record.
Well said, yeah, because that will allow everything to be used, and as far as a reason, if we go
Correct.
that route. If we go
That
that
is
route.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have a question. Is there an option of how can I put it, suspension without pay? Or some sort of mechanism that allows us to not pay Ms. LeGrand and continue to engage in negotiations before going and
I would prefer to have Ms. Townsend answer that question, as she would be more adept at ensuring any potential future litigation
I get it.
options are preserved.
Well, Board, we're waiting on Ms. LeGrand's counsel, Mr. Wenzel, and I probably not the wisest thing right now to proceed with any of the motions, I think, until we hear back from them.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And in
so-
fact, I'll go check to see how
Thank
things
you.
are proceeding.
Is Mr. Donovan here, the seventh grader? Nice kid. I mean, the way I feel, and I guess I won't say much because our counsel's not here, but is that it's good to foreclose on the prospect of negotiations before going through with a motion where, we could go off of something that's, irreversible potentially.
Well, I will say you can always settle in litigation. It happens too. The parties
I
are
know.
encouraged.
Yep.
Yeah.
We awkwardly wait. Any thoughts, Mr. Drainville? I'm joking.
Very comfortable in awkward silence.
Good. Bless you.
I understand he's finalizing conversations with his client, Mr. Wenzel, and unfortunately, I have to go to another board meeting, so.
Vaya con Dios.
I think you have all your resolutions ready to go, and everything's ready to go for you.
Thank
so
you.
we can get this finalized. Thank you.
So, Board, let's want to take a 3-minute recess, restroom, walk around, what have you. Okay, be back at 3:38, more or less. We're back in session. Commissioner Wassel had to leave for a personal appointment, but he will be, and I see him there. He is here via telephone. Commissioner, if you wish to speak, just say, wish to be recognized, what have you, just to get my attention, because I don't think you have the hand feature on your phone. Okay, go ahead.
All right, Ms. LeGrand has rejected the proposal that we gave of the $66,209.34. However, we have a counter demand from her, and that is to split the difference between our last offer and her original demand of the 110,668.08. And what that number looks like, it's $88,438.71. plus 2 months of COBRA. Her employment will be terminated effective today. We've got the mutual releases and a request that she be treated just like all other prior CEOs in terms of her 401A plan. So really, in essence, you're looking at an additional $12,000 or so that she's asking this board to give to her.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Who pays for the COBRA?
I'm sorry?
Who pays for the COBRA?
HART pays the COBRA.
Got it.
And the way I do, unless if my math is totally off, 60, it's about 70% of this is our funds that she would be contractually entitled to, more or less. The other 30% may be in dispute. Thoughts from the board? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Commissioner or Board Member Hudson, and Board Member Knight. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, we've got a lot of important work to do. Closure does have a value, so I would support adopting a resolution for that counter.
Second.
We have many a second. I first heard Board Member Myers, Board Member Knight, and then Board Member Owen. Go ahead.
Well, that's pretty much there.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
I've been working hard on my motion here, but I think it's in the best interest too. I'll be supporting it. So thank you.
Anyone else? And wanted to make sure, Board Member Wassel, any remarks, sir?
I'll yield.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure because of technology. Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Board Member Hudson, seconded by Board Member Myers. Roll call, please.
Chair Viera.
Yes.
Director Owen.
Yes.
Director Williams.
Yes.
Director
Yes.
Castor.
Yes, I just want to make sure that this is a resignation, correct? The resignation on those terms.
It's an end of employment, not technically resignation, so it's a settlement.
Okay.
I know, we
The
lawyers are
settlement
paying
formerly
our-
known as a resignation. Yes.
Director Frazier.
With mutual releases.
Yes.
Yes.
Director Hudson.
Yes.
Director Johnson.
Yes.
Director Kemp. Director Knight.
Yes.
Director Myers.
Yes.
Director Wolstel.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much, and board members, and to all of our staff and everybody, and to our attorneys. Everyone, thank you very much for your hard work and for your patience today. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. I got to run and get my son.